So this is chapter 12. We're going to look at homeostasis between the chapters of 10 and 16. Now in chapter 10, we looked at muscular tissue, and one of the homeostatic imbalances I would like to look at would be muscular dystrophy. Now this is an inherited disorder that causes this degeneration of skeletal muscle fibers. Now, as you can see here, it is sex-linked recessive. And so what that means is that it's inherited through the sex chromosomes, the X and the Y chromosome. Now, the mutated gene is actually found on the X chromosome. So as you can see here, the mother, this is a family tree here, the mother is on the left here, so she is a carrier. So she's XX chromosomes. What that means is that she's a carrier. Because it's recessive, it means that only one of these chromosomes has the recessive mutated gene for muscular dystrophy, and the other X has a regular gene, a non-mutated gene. So that she's a carrier of this gene, but that she's not expressing any of those symptoms. The father, on the other hand, is normal. Remember, the men are going to be XY chromosomes, just means that his X chromosome has a normal gene. It's not a mutated gene. Now, because this mutated gene is on the X chromosome, because men only have one X chromosome, muscular dystrophy usually strikes in boys almost exclusively. We often don't really see it in women all that much. So as you can see here, because the mother is a carrier, she can actually pass that gene down to her sons. And that's actually what we see in this family tree here. So as you can see here, they had a boy, a boy, a boy, a girl, and another boy. The squares indicate males, circles indicate females. So here we're going to have XY chromosome, XY chromosome, XY, XX, and XY. So it just means that to these boys, she gave this X chromosome, the one with the muscular dystrophy recessive gene, the mutated gene. So these ones have a little r, and a little r. And to this son, she gave the regular non-mutated X chromosome. Now, the daughter in this case is always going to have one regular non-mutated X chromosome because she's going to get that from her father here. So the one X chromosome is always going to come from her father and is always going to be a non-mutated gene, as you can see here, because he doesn't have that mutated gene at all. Now, the other one from her mother could be the regular non-mutated, or it could be the mutated gene. So even if it is the mutated gene, she could be a carrier, but she's not going to show any symptoms. Because it's a recessive gene, she would have to have both recessive genes in order to express muscular dystrophy or to show symptoms. So as you can see in these pictures, someone who does have or a boy who does have the recessive mutated gene for muscular dystrophy, when they're quite young, they actually don't show many symptoms, or maybe very minimally. And usually the disorder or symptoms usually appear between the ages of 2 and 5. This is usually when the parents kind of notice that the child kind of falls often. They have difficulty using their muscles, so difficulty running or jumping, difficulty playing. Their muscles just don't work like other normal kids. So here you can see this child is starting to develop a lot of weakness, especially in their pelvic girdle muscles. Also this lordosis, or this extra curvature in the back here in the spine. And also another symptom is enlarged calves, as you can kind of see in this bottom picture here. Sometimes they're a little bit larger than normal, but not always. And the interesting thing too is that the lordosis almost always disappears or appears to disappear when the child sits down. So you don't see that curvature in the back there. You kind of see it's normal. But when they stand, you see this big curvature in the lower back. Now, usually by age 12 or so, most boys with muscular dystrophy are unable to walk. So their muscles just haven't developed at all. It's this really big degeneration of skeletal muscle fibers, and they're not really able to work. So they have these crippling deformation. And then even by age 20 or so, they have cardiac failure, respiratory failure. These are all muscles that we need to work in order to survive. So by that age, they have these failures in these major muscles, your heart and your lungs, and that usually causes death pretty early. So approximately about 20 years old in many cases. The muscular system is actually a really cool system that has a lot of influence on the homeostasis of other body systems. So a couple of these I definitely want to focus on today. So first off would be the integumentary system. A big one would be exercise of the muscles increases blood flow to the skin. This is really important for the health and the longevity of the epidermis and the dermis tissues. In the skeletal system, we know that muscles attach to bones, helping to cause movement for moving your hands and other body parts like your legs for walking, running. And they also provide a lot of stability for holding your head up, for sitting, for those kind of activities that you really need to work. If your head's flopping around all the time, it's not going to be protecting your brain very well. Now in the nervous system, we know that our muscles will contract when we're cold. It's a means of shivering, and this actually works to generate body temperature, to increase your body temperature when you're cold, and this is an involuntary contraction, so it really involves the nervous system. This is really important to keep your body temperature at least a little bit higher when you are in colder temperatures so that you don't have body tissues that get too cold and they can actually die when they become too cold. Next, the cardiovascular system. One of the most important systems in your body, pumps blood around your entire body to bring oxygen and nutrients and to take away waste and carbon dioxide. And we know that the heart's a muscle. So it's a very important muscle. Regular exercise or using your other muscles, this causes muscular hypertrophy. So this makes your heart larger and improves in the pumping efficiency of your heart so that it can actually it doesn't have to work as hard to get blood to your extremities. The lymphatic system. So one thing that we haven't really touched too much on yet, but we will when we talk about the lymphatic system, is that skeletal muscles actually help the flow of lymph around the body. So you have lymph vessels all throughout your body that help in immunity and fighting off bacteria and diseases and viruses. And without a lot of skeletal muscles, especially at your extremities, that lymph would kind of get stuck at the bottom of your feet, especially because of gravity and because it's so far from any other area of the body. So skeletal muscle actually helps to contract and to pump that lymph back up to the heart. So we're going to, we're actually going to be able to help that lymph flow by using our skeletal muscles. In the respiratory system, some of the torso muscles as well as the diaphragm we know are really important muscles in forcefully inhaling and forcefully exhaling. And so these skeletal muscles are really important with breathing. And again, just like the cardiovascular system, regular exercise actually improves the efficiency of this system. The digestive system is another really big system that has a lot of muscles involved, and a lot of these are going to be smooth muscles, like smooth muscle sphincters. These are going to be controlling the volume and also the flow of a lot of fluid within the gastrointestinal tract. And we also use smooth muscles in the walls of the gastrointestinal tract to mix contents, to make sure that these contents come into contact with the edges of the small intestines and the large intestines to absorb better, and also to mix those contents to make sure that they all come into contact with enzymes so that we can break down everything. Smooth muscles are involved in a lot of that. In the urinary system, we also have those smooth muscles and sphincters to stop flow of fluid or to open and allow the flow of fluid through. So those smooth muscle sphincters are very important there. And then in the reproductive systems, the last one that we'll talk about here, muscles are really important for moving the oocyte along uterine tubes, and also for helping menstrual flow. So muscles are really important in all of our body systems and help to regulate a lot of those systems in their regular daily activities. So in chapter 11, which was the muscular system chapter, one of the homeostatic imbalances I would like to talk about is compartment syndrome. Now, if you remember when we talked about this chapter in the lecture videos, that skeletal muscles in limbs are organized into these units that are called compartments. So when we have an external or even an internal pressure that constricts those structures in the compartments, we can have a lot of damaged blood vessels in those areas. Now, things that can cause compartment syndrome, this would be like crushing or penetrating injuries. So like if you had a car fall on your arm and actually crush a lot of those structures and blood vessels within the compartments in your arm, this would cause compartment syndrome. Even wearing a cast that's really too tight and constricts a lot of blood flow, that would cause it as well. Or even overstretching of a muscle can cause this internal pressure that actually causes compartment syndrome as well. A lot of the symptoms that we would see with this type of disorder would be pain, burning, pressure, even paralysis of that limb. Now, if the pressure is not released, the pressure in a compartment can build and build, and it can have a lot of serious consequences. And now we're going to have a lot of pressure increase because those blood vessels are damaged. We're going to have a lot of buildup and accumulation of blood and interstitial fluid within that area, because normally blood comes in and we're going to be removing a lot of that interstitial fluid around the cells and around the tissues. But without those blood vessels coming in, or when blood vessels are damaged, they can't remove that interstitial fluid. And so those cells are going to be continually still trying to work, and we're going to build up interstitial fluid around the tissues and around the cells. Now, the serious consequences that we can have would be a lot of tissue injury or even tissue death. And so we do have to kind of treat this as quickly as possible. And one treatment option is this surgical procedure in where the muscle fascia is actually cut to relieve that pressure. And when that pressure is relieved, this can have some at least short-term treatment options, and possibly then the blood vessels can actually heal and we can get blood flow back to that compartment. If it does go too long untreated, or if there is too much tissue death, then amputation would be the only other option. Another homeostatic imbalance I would like to talk about for Chapter 11, the muscular system, would be plantar fasciitis, also called painful heel syndrome. This is really just an inflammatory reaction that's due to irritation or constant chronic irritation to the plantar aponeurosis, which is the fascia that has its origin on the calcaneus bone. Remember, it's the heel bone. So there are a couple of risk factors that could cause plantar fasciitis. So one of them would be that the aponeurosis begins to become less elastic with age. So age actually becomes a risk factor in this. Also could be related to weight-bearing activities or being on your feet all day. Things like walking or jogging, or even increasing the weight of what you're carrying, so lifting a lot of heavy objects. Really anything that increases the weight bearing on your heel are all going to be risk factors. So also being overweight would be an additional another risk factor to plantar fasciitis. Now, often it's not that bad, and treatment options are pretty mild. So these include like ice and heat, stretching exercises, or even weight loss if overweight is being a risk factor in a particular case. If it does get pretty bad though, and these treatment options aren't sufficient, then surgery does become the last option. Chapter 12 was our nervous tissue chapter, and the homeostatic imbalance for this one that I would like to focus on would be multiple sclerosis, also called MS. This is a disease that involves progressive destruction of the myelin sheaths around neurons within the central nervous system. It does usually appear between the ages of 20 and 40 in most of the population, and it does affect females about twice as often as it affects males, interestingly. MS is actually considered an autoimmune disease. So autoimmune actually means your own body's immune system will attack your own cells. So this degeneration is actually due to the body's own immune system. Some of the symptoms that someone with MS might have, the first ones would be kind of like heaviness or weakness in the muscles, not being able to move your muscles as well. Double vision would also be another primary symptom, and then also abnormal sensations like numbness, tingling, or pain as well. This disease is actually kind of interesting because it kind of forms in this relapsing, remitting phase. So it usually starts in early adulthood, and we have kind of attacks where symptoms are going to be very prominent, and then it kind of dies down over time. Usually one attack follows another over the years, usually every year or two. Now, we actually don't know the cause of MS yet, but we do think that there is both a genetic component as well as some environmental component as well. Now, there's not a specific treatment to completely get rid of MS, but we currently do use this treatment with injections of what's called beta interferon, and this actually kind of just lengthens the time between relapses. It also decreases the severity of these relapses, and we're kind of just going to slow the new lesions of some cases, so slowing the damage of the myelin sheaths. But no really way to completely get rid of MS, so it's something that people have to deal with for their entire lives. Chapter 13, this was the spinal cord and spinal nerves chapter, and the homeostatic imbalance I would like to touch on for this chapter is poliomyelitis. Often it's just abbreviated to polio, and this is a disease that's caused by a virus called the poliovirus. Now, after infection with the poliovirus, we usually get fever, headache, stiff neck and back, also a lot of muscle pain and weakness, and then loss of some somatic reflexes. This is a virus that attacks neurons, and in the most serious and untreated forms, this virus produces paralysis by completely destroying the cell bodies of motor neurons in the nuclei of the cranial nerves. So you're going to see a lot of these paralysis type symptoms, quadriplegics, a lot of severe paralysis in the lower limbs, dragging, crawling, crouching gaits, all of these ways to try and help get around, while still having this really strong muscle weakness, not having much reflexes, a lot of deep muscle pain, that kind of thing. Polio can also cause death from respiratory or heart failure if that virus does invade the neurons in those vital centers in the brain that control breathing and heart functions. So even though the polio vaccine in North America has largely eradicated this disease, we do sometimes still see cases. Chapter 14 was the brain and cranial nerve chapter, and the homeostatic imbalance I would like to talk about would be Alzheimer's disease for this chapter. So this is quite a disabling demential disease, and really with this disease you get a loss of reasoning and ability to care for oneself. And it is decently widespread in the population. It really does affect more than 10% of the population over the age of 65. Now, just like MS, the cause of Alzheimer's is really unknown, but we do think it's due to, again, a combination of genetic and environmental factors, and it also is just kind of part of the aging process for a lot of people. So there are a couple big structural abnormalities that we see in the brains of Alzheimer's patients. One of them is the loss of neurons that release acetylcholine. So a big hallmark of Alzheimer's disease is this destruction of acetylcholine neurons, especially those that are found in the nucleus basalis. This is going to be this group of large cells below the globus pallidus. We also see beta amyloid plaques, which are these clusters of abnormal proteins that are deposited outside of neurons. And we also see neurofibrillary tangles. And these are these abnormal bundles of filaments inside neurons in these affected brain regions. So we see this degradation of a lot of brain areas. So this shrinking of the cerebral cortex, shrinking of the hippocampus, and very large ventricles. So these areas of non-neuronal space are going to be much larger in these Alzheimer's patients. So the nervous system, just like I talked about with the musculatory system, are like really important in homeostasis in every other body system. Everything is interconnected. We need every body system to survive. So a couple big parts here. The nervous system contributes to the skeletal system. Pain receptors really help us a lot to avoid a lot of tissue damage or bone trauma. So we really need pain in order to survive. It's really a survival mechanism. In the cardiovascular system, we really need the nervous system to provide those nerve impulses that really help our heartbeat to continue. So we're going to help that pacemaker. We're going to power the pacemaker with the nervous system and also control the forcefulness of each heartbeat. The autonomic nervous system is also going to regulate blood pressure and blood flow through those blood vessels. In the respiratory system, we really need that nervous system to help us to continue breathing. Those respiratory areas in the brainstem help us to continue breathing subconsciously, that we don't have to think about breathing constantly. And the autonomic nervous system also helps to regulate the diameter of airways to control how much air we intake. In the digestive system, we have the enteric and parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system that are actually going to help with digestion quite a bit. In the urinary system, we're going to regulate the blood flow to the kidneys and really control or influence that rate of formation of urine. And then in the reproductive systems, we have the hypothalamus, regulates the release of anterior pituitary hormones, really have a lot of control and regulation over the ovaries and testes. And And also those touch receptor nerve impulses from suckling infants can help to release oxytocin and also to produce or cause milk ejection during nursing. So these are all really important parts of regulation from the nervous system to other parts of the body. Chapter 15 was the autonomic nervous system chapter, and the homeostatic imbalance I want to talk about is called Raynaud phenomenon. So in this phenomenon, we have the digits, which are the fingers and toes, actually become ischemic, which means that they have a lack of blood, and this is usually after exposure to cold or even emotional stress or distress actually causes this as well. So this actually occurs because of sympathetic stimulation that causes vasoconstriction in the digits. And when we have vasoconstriction, we're going to decrease blood flow significantly to the digits. And because of this, they actually change color. So a couple of these pictures here, you can actually see the digits actually look white. You can see here, digits are looking white, and here some of the digits are white as well. And it could occur on some or all of the fingers. And they look white due to having no blood flow in that area. They could also look blue, as you can see in here, this picture, and even this picture here. The ends of those digits are looking blue, and this is due to having a lot or a lack of oxygen in those areas. So it's kind of having this buildup of deoxygenated blood in those areas. Now, when we do have really severe cases, the digits can actually kind of die because they don't have any oxygen in those areas. No oxygen, no nutrients, because of that lack of blood flow. Now, often the treatment for Raynaud's is just to warm the digits, to dilate those blood vessels and increase blood flow to the fingers and toes. But also in extreme cases, there is a treatment with a calcium channel blocker, which is actually going to help to dilate those blood vessels. The last chapter we're going to look at is going to be chapter 16, and that's the sensory, motor, and integrative systems chapter. And the homeostatic imbalance we want to look at here is going to be Parkinson's disease. And this is a progressive disorder of the central nervous system neurons that usually affects people around 60 or a little bit older. So this is really a disorder involving dopamine. So in Parkinson's disease, the neurons that release dopamine, the neurotransmitter dopamine, are actually going to die off or to degenerate. And it's going to be this loss of the neurotransmitter dopamine that's actually going to cause a lot of the symptoms that we see in Parkinson's disease. So we're usually going to have a lot of involuntary skeletal muscle contractions that are usually going to interfere with voluntary contractions or voluntary movement. We're going to see shaking or tremors in the legs, but also in the arms as well. Head, pretty much tremoring all over the body. Motor performance is also greatly impaired. Because of that, we have frequent falls often. Also this interesting gait where it's kind of a freezing gait or stopping and starting kind of walking. A couple of other things, we do have a lot of pain associated with Parkinson's disease and also a lot of gastrointestinal dysfunction as well. Now again, like most of the other diseases we've talked about, the cause of Parkinson's disease is not really well known. There is a lot of speculation on risk factors of chemicals and pesticides, herbicides, even carbon monoxide being high risk factors, because we actually don't see a lot of genetic component to this disease. Many people who have Parkinson's don't have other family members who also have the disease. Now, often the treatment for Parkinson's disease that can even alleviate symptoms a little bit would be increasing the dopamine in these patients. And I think that will be the end of this chapter.